The day began just like any other in the unassuming little suburb of Baywick, with its brick-paved sidewalks and blooming flower boxes lining the narrow streets. Against the backdrop of a sky brushed in pastel hues of early evening, the last hints of sunlight cast long, sleepy shadows across the town's modest skyline. Families ambled along the sidewalks, popping into local boutiques or grabbing ice cream from corner shops. Tourists paused at the antique street lamps to snap photos of the quaint architecture and the bold murals that decorated a few walls in shades of gold and crimson. From the center of town, you could catch the faint scent of coffee beans roasting at the oldest cafe in Baywick, while the tinkling of wind chimes decorated the lulling hush of a typical suburban twilight. Yet, as serene as the evening seemed, the calm was shattered without warning. A deep-throated rumble, like an echo of distant thunder, rolled across the placid streets. Heads turned, conversations halted, and several people involuntarily took a step back from the curb. Emerging from beyond the bend of Main Street, a row of roaring motorcycles burst into view. Black metal frames gleamed under neon shop signs, and the riders atop these machines wore hardened expressions that suggested they had long ago abandoned any notion of compromise. The roar grew louder, culminating in a deafening synchronized bellow that ricocheted off the brick facades. Leading the procession was a hulking man named Knox, whose Confederate flag bandana wrapped firmly around his head served as a menacing emblem. The arrogance in his grin hinted at someone far too accustomed to pushing others aside. Those who followed him wore matching leather jackets emblazoned with a twisted serpent insignia, forming a formation that practically dared the town's residents to stand in their way. Locals instinctively backed off, slipping behind parked cars or ducking into nearby doorways to avoid confrontation. Even the boldest tourists lowered their phones, unsettled by the overt threat radiating from the bikes. Barreling directly toward a decades-old watering hole called Gus's Place, the gang showed no regard for traffic laws, pedestrians, or the fundamental peace that had defined Baywick at dusk. Moments later, the motorcycles came to an abrupt halt, blocking the narrow road. Horns blared indignantly, yet no drivers seemed eager to argue with these leather-clad strangers. The riders dismounted in perfect unison, their boots hitting the ground with a forceful thud. A hush swept over the intersection, replaced only by the rasp of idling engines. It felt like the entire suburb held its breath, unsure whether the group's intent was merely rowdy fun or something more sinister. The significance of that uncertainty weighed heavily on those who watched. This was the spark that threatened to ignite something far larger, a night that would test not only the quiet fortitude of Baywick, but the resolve of one man in particular.
Without missing a beat, Knox jerked his chin toward the nearest entrance, Gus's Place, a bar whose warm interior lights spoke of casual camaraderie. Inside, silhouettes of patrons could be glimpsed chatting, sipping on drinks, and unwinding after their workday. The bikers advanced like wolves toward new territory, their swagger as potent as any weapon. A young couple on the sidewalk froze mid-step, hands clenched tightly together as their eyes darted from the bikes to the bar.
Two older ladies in floral print dresses hovered near a shop window, dread mingling with disbelief on their faces. Suddenly, the town's friendly aura felt invaded by an air of foreboding. Inside, Gus's Place was a cozy haven of dark wood tables and vintage photographs, each capturing moments of the town's history. The proprietor himself, Gus, manned the bar, a man in his late 60s with a bushy mustache and an easy smile.
Tonight, that easy smile wavered as the door swung open to reveal Knox and his small army. The bikers moved in with palpable entitlement, their boots scraping the worn floorboards. Others in the room shrank back at once, confronted by the sheer audacity on display. One tall, gaunt figure named Ryder surveyed the bar, a sneer forming on his lips. The vibrations of the jukebox, previously a soft undercurrent, now clashed with the bikers' raucous presence. As they formed a cluster at the center of the room, they seemed to relish the sudden drop in conversation. Gus, perched behind the bar, tried not to let his trembling hands show. Years of service gave him a knack for reading crowds, and this crowd, he sensed, was different, hungry for conflict. His gaze flicked to the back, where an imposing man quietly finished a bite of his meal. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Dressed in a simple black shirt and jeans, The Rock could have been anyone looking for an evening meal. Yet there was an undeniable aura about him, an understated confidence that suggested he was no stranger to adversity. He glanced at the intruders, eyes flickering briefly with recognition, then calmly returned to his plate. The tension in the bar was nearly suffocating, each patron aware that the slightest provocation might send the situation hurtling toward chaos. As if to underscore that point, Knox barked out a condescending laugh, clearly reveling in the atmosphere of intimidation. He guided his crew toward a row of tables, shoving aside chairs with a cavalier disregard for anyone else in the bar. The sudden hush, broken only by a few clinks of glassware, told The Rock all he needed to know about the new arrivals. He took a measured breath, determined to hold on to the semblance of calm he'd come here to find. Whether that tranquility would endure much longer was anyone's guess. Standing just behind Knox was Frankie, a short but robust biker woman sporting a vest with patches that declared "Born to Ride" and "Iron Fury." Her posture radiated a smug defiance. Meanwhile, a wiry man named Spider lurked close by, his jittery motions hinting at an unsteady psyche that thrived on turmoil. Together with Ryder, they formed a trio that hovered near their leader like satellites around a dark planet. Gus, swallowing the lump in his throat, worked up the courage to speak. "Evening, folks," he managed, aiming for polite but landing on uneasy. "Y'all need a seat?" His question was met with dismissive snorts and a few idle glares, as if the invitation itself was an insult. The Rock glanced up from his meal. Anyone watching closely might have seen the subtle tightening of his jaw muscles. He was not one to invite trouble, but he recognized the potential for it, crackling in the air. He resumed eating without a word, projecting an air of indifference that only seemed to fuel the biker's aggressive stance. The other patrons were equally apprehensive, shifting in their seats or trying to appear invisible. Most had witnessed bar scuffles over the years, but the intimidation emanating from these new arrivals felt like an entirely different breed of threat. The music from the jukebox, some lazy country tune, only underscored the tension, a curious counterpoint to the simmering hostility. Knox ambled closer to The Rock, dragging a chair across the floor with a harsh screech that set everyone's nerves on edge. Turning the chair backward, he straddled it casually, glaring as if daring The Rock to say something. "You're a big fella," Knox said, voice thick with condescension. "Real big." The Rock paused, looking up slowly. He locked eyes with Knox and offered a single nod, the kind that neither confirmed nor denied the implied challenge. Frankie snickered, leaning against a nearby table, while Spider grinned, evidently eager for sparks to fly. Ryder stood a few steps behind, his expression unreadable, arms folded over his chest. Gus cleared his throat from behind the bar. "Y'all want a round on the house?" he ventured, desperate to defuse the standoff. But Knox ignored him, directing his attention solely at The Rock. "What's your name, pal? Or do I just call you King Kong?" The barb landed in the hush, and the tension in the room ratcheted up. The Rock set down his fork carefully, his gaze unwavering. "Dwayne Johnson," he replied, voice calm. "I'm just trying to eat here." The lack of fear in his tone left the bikers momentarily unsure how to escalate. Yet their blood was up, and the advantage of intimidation was a high they weren't eager to give up. Outside, curious faces peered through the windows, lured by the undercurrent of conflict. Inside, it was as though a thundercloud hung overhead, waiting for the flicker of lightning that would unleash a storm. Knox leaned forward, tapping his fingers on the chair's back in a menacing rhythm. "Well, Dwayne," he drawled, "you look like you think you own this place. People who think they're tough don't always realize when they've walked into a snake's den." His words dripped with condescension, coaxing the rest of his group into snickers. Frankie lifted an eyebrow, her fingers toying with a small chain on her hip, while Spider's gaze darted around as though seeking an excuse to pounce. Ryder's lips curved in a slight smirk. The Rock casually wiped his mouth with a napkin, unfazed by the implied threat. "Don't want any trouble," he said evenly, letting his eyes sweep across the gang before returning to Knox. "But if you're looking for it, I'm not the kind to run." From behind the bar, Gus felt sweat bead on his forehead. He knew a collision was imminent. He could sense it in the tension-laden air that seemed to press down on them like a physical weight. More than one patron considered inching their way toward the exit, but the fear of drawing attention to themselves held them captive. It was a silent dilemma: risk leaving and possibly provoke the bikers, or stay put and witness whatever chaos might ensue. Knox gave a derisive snort, shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter. "Big talk," he muttered. "Let's see if you can back it up." He rose to his feet with deliberate slowness, clearly intending to loom over the rock. Yet, even at full height, he found himself matched, if not overshadowed, by the man he was trying to intimidate. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed Knox's features, but it vanished almost as quickly as it came. Frankie stepped forward, crossing her arms as her vest's patches glimmered under the bar's subdued lights. "Best step down," she said in a tone that sounded like an order. Her bravado rang through the hush, but the rock simply raised an eyebrow, unimpressed by her posturing. Spider hissed a laugh, his high, shaky cackle sending a chill through anyone within earshot. Ryder, typically silent, shifted his weight from one foot to the other, ready to join the fray at a moment's notice. The bar felt like it was teetering on the edge of a blade, the mild hum of the jukebox now nearly drowned out by the pounding of hearts. Outside, a small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the tension they could practically sense radiating through the windows. The Rock inhaled slowly, steadying himself. "You all done talking?" he asked, voice low. His composure, far from arrogance, seemed grounded in certainty. Knox's face hardened. "We'll decide when we're done," he snapped. "And right now, I think we've only just begun." He shot a glance at Frankie, Spider, and Ryder, who took his cue to close in. The Rock squared his stance, a calm acceptance settling over his features. In the loaded silence that followed, it became apparent that words were no longer enough to keep the storm at bay. A single spark could ignite a fury that no one would soon forget. Gus's attempts to intervene came in a trembling voice. Fellas," he implored, stepping out from behind the bar. "Let's not do anything hasty. We can settle this without broken bones and police sirens, right?" The Rock shifted slightly, ensuring Gus was out of harm's way. Knox, however, spared the bartender only a fleeting glance. "Maybe you ought to mind your own business, old man," he growled, eyes blazing with challenge. "We came here for a good time, and I don't see why that should stop." The Rock's posture remained alert, but he radiated a sense of self-control that only fueled Knox's anger further. Frankie exhaled sharply through her nose, stepping closer, while Spider's restless fingers drummed along the edge of a table. Ryder's eyes darted from the Rock's hands to his face, looking for any signal of an incoming strike. A hush settled over the onlookers. Those trapped in their seats glanced around, hoping someone braver might rise to the occasion. A pair of middle-aged siblings by the jukebox held onto each other's arms. One man near the door craned his neck, caught sight of the intimidating scene, and promptly retreated onto the sidewalk. This was a powder keg, and everyone sensed an impending explosion. "There's no call for this," the Rock said levelly, addressing Knox in a voice that carried a resonant calm. "You want a drink? Fine. You want to talk it out? We can do that too, but you try to hurt anyone here, I will stop you." It was neither threat nor boast. It was a simple statement of fact that landed with the weight of an anvil. The directness of his words made Knox's features twist with resentment. "You really think you can tell us what to do?" he demanded, voice trembling with barely contained fury. The Rock tilted his head fractionally. "I'm just letting you know the consequences," he replied. At that, Frankie spat on the floor, her face contorting in a sneer. "Enough with this back and forth," she growled. "Let's see if he can stand up to all of us." She lunged forward, evidently deciding that talk was cheap. With lightning reflexes, the Rock sidestepped her, planting a firm hand against her shoulder and steering her momentum away. She stumbled, cursing loudly as she caught herself against a chair. Spider seized the moment to rush forward, his lanky arms swinging in an erratic flurry, but the Rock blocked the wild punches, pushing Spider back with controlled force. When Ryder launched a kick at his ribs, the Rock spun to the side, deflecting the blow with an outstretched arm. Though the confrontation had just begun, the bikers found themselves unnerved. Their initial plan, overwhelm him with numbers, wasn't yielding the easy takedown they had expected. By the bar, Gus looked on with a mixture of awe and terror. Had the Rock not been here, the scene might have devolved into a terrifying spree of violence. Instead, it was shaping up to be a test of skill and will, one that the Rock appeared determined to pass. Knox's pride brooked no defeat. Seeing his crew falter, he let out a roar that would have intimidated a lesser adversary. Charging at the rock, he swung a clenched fist at his jaw, but the rock ducked low, hooking an arm around Knox's waist and using his own momentum to flip the biker leader onto his back. The floorboards rattled with the impact, eliciting gasps from around the room. Frankie, recovering from her stumble, aimed a kick at the rock's midsection. He twisted at the hips, catching her leg with both hands and gently but firmly shoving her off balance. She landed on one knee, hatred burning in her eyes. Spider, seeing an opening, lunged from the rock's right side, fists a blur of motion. For all his frantic energy, his blows lacked precision, and the rock parried them with methodical calm. It was like watching a seasoned boxer handle a brawler. Each swing from Spider found only empty air or collided with the rock's raised forearms. Behind them, Ryder circled, searching for a chance to land a sneaky hit. Gus considered making a run for the phone again, but the swirling fight drew his attention. He feared that if he made a sudden move, the bikers might divert their wrath onto him or other patrons. Instead, he silently prayed the cops would pass by, or a concerned citizen would have the good sense to place a call. Just as the rock threw a measured punch at Spider's shoulder, enough to sting but not devastate, Knox scrambled to his feet. Red-faced and breathing hard, he glared at the rock with raw loathing. "Think you're special, huh?" Knox growled. "We'll show you that no one disrespects us." He glanced at Ryder and Frankie, rallying them with a jerk of his head. The trio converged on the rock, forcing him to block strikes from multiple angles. The rock shifted with uncanny fluidity, pivoting on the balls of his feet to track each incoming blow. His forearms took the brunt of the hits, but the bikers were finding it near impossible to land a clean shot. And every time one of them left an opening, he responded with a short, precise counter that left them staggering. Outside, the crowd at the windows grew larger, some passers-by gaping in astonishment at the barroom chaos. A few had phones out, filming. The tension in Baywick's once peaceful center had escalated into a spectacle that no one would soon forget. Riders from the motorcycle gang, who hadn't entered now, lingered near their bikes, craning their necks for a glimpse of the action. The Rock, unrelenting, saw Frankie lunge again and sidestepped, catching her wrist to stop a reckless punch. With a twist and a controlled push, he sent her stumbling into a table. The crashing sound of chairs being knocked aside accompanied her curse. Spider tried to sweep the Rock's legs from behind, but the Rock hopped backward, narrowly avoiding the attempt. It was a high-wire dance of reflexes and brute force, set to the soundtrack of gasps and curses. And still, the bikers refused to relent, their pride driving them forward despite the punishment they were receiving. Somewhere in the periphery, a phone did ring, the shrill tone slicing through the chaos. Gus momentarily glanced toward the bar, torn between answering and staying out of the fight's path. Meanwhile, the Rock maintained his position, refusing to give ground. Knox, chest heaving, barked at Spider and Ryder to flank from either side. They obeyed with grim determination, while Frankie staggered to her feet, spitting an angry retort. The Rock's eyes flicked from one threat to the next, reading their movements like a book. It became clear that no matter how many times the bikers tried to surround him, his training and presence of mind granted him an edge they couldn't overcome. The exhausted hush of the patrons was punctuated by the occasional crash of broken glass or a cry of pain. A young woman near the door covered her mouth, torn between horror and awe. A few bystanders on the sidewalk whispered about calling the police, but the brawl's immediacy held them rooted in place. If they called, who would break it up without risking further bloodshed? The Rock delivered a quick jab to Ryder's ribs, causing him to double over, then pivoted to deflect a blow from Knox. Sparks of fury lit Knox's eyes as he forced the Rock into an exchange of heavy punches. One blow caught the Rock's arm, another grazed his side, but he shook them off with a clenched jaw. In response, he slammed an elbow into Knox's shoulder, eliciting a pained grunt. Spider attempted another mad dash, brandishing a broken bottle he had scooped off a nearby table. The jagged edges glinted malevolently under the bar's dim lights, but the Rock knocked the weapon aside with a swift angled block. Unbalanced, Spider slipped on spilled beer, crashing to the floor with a thud that rattled the bottles on the nearest table. Frankie, determined not to be overshadowed, swung a stray pool cue at the Rock's back. He half-turned, absorbing the impact on a meaty shoulder rather than his spine. Though the blow stung, he reached out, seized the cue's tip, and yanked it from her grasp. Frankie stumbled, glaring with unyielding rage. The Rock caught her eye for a moment, his expression a measured warning. Enough. but she refused to cede. Fueled by adrenaline, she raised her fists again, only for the Rock to sidestep her next swing, hooking an arm around her midsection. He set her down hard, but not brutally on the ground. Knox roared for a second time, charging in the wake of the Rock's maneuver, their eyes locked in mutual challenge. One might have expected a brutish exchange of fists, but the Rock deftly sidestepped, leaving Knox to crash into a toppled chair. An eruption of laughter burst from one corner of the bar, a nervous release by a patron who couldn't contain the absurdity of what he was witnessing, a gang of bikers systematically bested by a single man. That laughter fueled Knox's anger further. He scrambled up, face contorted in ire, but the Rock met him with a shove that sent him back toward the table where Spider was still sprawled. The synergy of their collisions drew curses and groans. All the while, outside the bar's windows, the crowd grew denser, an impromptu audience to a fight that no one had foreseen. It was in the midst of this chaos that the shriek of sirens finally became audible, cutting through the night. Lights strobing red and blue swept across the windows, reflecting in the shards of broken glass like twisted confetti. The Rock noticed the sudden shift in the onlookers' expressions as they realized help was on the way. A heavy exhale of relief rippled among the patrons still pinned to their seats. Gus also registered the change, his eyes darting to the door with renewed hope. Knox, Frankie, Spider, and Ryder each had their own visceral reactions. They'd arrived expecting to intimidate, maybe start a scuffle, but not to be outmatched and definitely not to face law enforcement. The sirens crescendoed, and soon the door was flung open with force. Two officers, Brooks, a broad-shouldered man with a steady gaze, and Ramirez, lithe and quick, stormed inside, firearms drawn. They took in the scene, shattered chairs, spilled drinks, battered bikers, and one imposing figure standing tall among the wreckage. "Freeze! Hands up!" Brooks barked, adrenaline spiking in his voice. The Rock complied without hesitation, raising his hands to show he had no weapon. The bikers, too, seemed stunned by the abrupt arrival of the police. Knox swore under his breath, clutching his side, while Frankie glared defiantly at the officers. Ryder leaned against a broken table, trying to regain his breath, and Spider cradled a bruised wrist. Gus stepped from behind the bar, voice quivering as he addressed the officers. "They started it, officers," he insisted, nodding toward the bikers. "They came in, threatening everyone. Dwayne here was just defending himself. And us." Brooks's sharp gaze swept across the downed bikers and the battered interior. Shards of glass crunched underfoot as Ramirez stepped forward, scanning the gang members with a blend of caution and pity. "We got a call about a disturbance," Brooks said, holstering his firearm now that the immediate threat seemed contained. "Looks like more than just a bar fight to me." Knox spat on the ground, muttering curses directed at the Rock. One quick glance from Brooks silenced him. The tension had not entirely lifted. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath, wondering if the bikers might erupt again. But their eyes betrayed a grudging acceptance of defeat. The Rock let his arms drop, still wary. He shot Gus a questioning glance, and Gus returned a grateful nod. Meanwhile, Ramirez stepped over to Frankie, who winced from a tender bruise on her arm. "You want to tell us why you folks thought this was a good idea?" Ramirez asked, keeping an even tone. Frankie's nostrils flared, but she opted to remain silent. Brooks, turning his attention to the Rock, asked, "Mind explaining what happened here?" Before the Rock could respond, Gus interjected, his words tumbling out in a rush. "He saved us, officer. They showed up, looking for trouble, harassing everyone. Dwayne wasn't going to let them hurt anyone." Brooks regarded the Rock with a flicker of recognition sparking in his eyes. "Dwayne, huh?" he murmured. "Somehow that name rings a bell." Still catching his breath, the Rock managed a nod, acutely aware of the battered group behind him. Knox let out a bitter laugh, wiping a smear of blood from his split lip. "He's a real tough guy," Knox growled. "Came in here acting like he owned the place." The Rock pursed his lips but said nothing, letting Gus's testimony speak for him. Officer Brooks narrowed his gaze. "A tough guy who took on 4 people and still seems fine. That's one for the books." Ramirez knelt beside Spider, giving the injured wrist a quick once-over. Spider flinched but kept his complaints to himself. Frankie and Ryder stood by, every bit as defiant, while the rest of the bar's patrons began to relax, if only slightly. Some even dared to approach the scene, offering to help pick up toppled chairs or gather the worst of the broken glass. A burly local named Thomas pressed a damp towel against a bloodstain on the floor, muttering about how he'd never seen anything like it. Gus, determined to set the record straight, repeated the events in rapid-fire detail for the officers. He described how the bikers barged in, pushing people around, and how the Rock tried to remain calm until they forced his hand. Officers Brooks and Ramirez exchanged glances. Their posture softened as they realized the man in front of them, although towering in build, had likely averted a disaster rather than caused one. "All right," Brooks said. "Everyone's going to need to give statements, but let's get these folks some medical attention first." He gestured for Ramirez to call an ambulance, noticing Frankie's bruised face and the gash on Knox's forehead. Despite the bikers' hostility, they were still injured parties who needed care. The Rock took a step back, the adrenaline beginning to ebb from his system. He felt the sting of countless minor scrapes and bruises he'd scarcely registered during the brawl. A hush settled over the bar as the police began to shepherd the bikers into a controlled space near the exit. The gang glowered, clearly humiliated at being taken down, and by a single man no less. Outside, the murmuring crowd parted to make room for the paramedics who arrived next, their flashing lights slicing through the darkness. As the severity of what had happened sank in, patrons exhaled sighs of relief. One by one, they approached the Rock, offering thanks. An older woman patted his shoulder, tears shimmering in her eyes. "We owe you," she whispered, voice trembling. "You saved us from those hooligans." A faint smile tugged at the corners of the Rock's mouth. "Just did what needed doing," he said quietly. Across the bar, Knox tried to push past Ramirez, only to be met with a firm hand that kept him in line. His curses rang hollow, overshadowed by his obvious defeat. The tension had shifted now. It was less about immediate violence and more about the aftermath. Police reports, medical checks, and the buzzing realization that a normal night in Baywick had been upended. As Brooks motioned for the Rock to join him outside, the big man glanced around at the wreckage. Splintered wood, smashed glass, and overturned chairs bore silent testimony to the chaos. He briefly locked eyes with Gus, who gave him a nod of gratitude. Then, inhaling a steadying breath, the Rock followed the officer into the cooler night air. Officer Brooks ushered the Rock a few steps away from the bar's entrance, the swirl of red and blue lights dancing off nearby windows. In the street, one ambulance stood ready to receive the wounded bikers, who were slowly staggering out under police supervision. The crowd outside, still sizable, watched in subdued awe. Phone cameras flashed, capturing the final moments of the confrontation. Law enforcement taking control, while the Rock stood aside, his stance reflecting both relief and lingering tension. Brooks regarded him for a moment, arms folded. "You handled yourself well back there. Most people would have taken a beating, but you didn't just walk away. You made sure everyone else was safe too." The Rock's gaze flicked toward the bar. "I don't like bullies," he said simply. His voice carried a note of finality that spoke volumes. Brooks studied him for another beat. "You got a background that explains that skill set?" he asked. The Rock hesitated briefly, then nodded. "I used to serve in law enforcement," he admitted, choosing his words carefully. "Been out for a bit, but some instincts never fade." Understanding lit Brooks's eyes. "That's why your name rang a bell," he said with a wry smile. "Well, retired or not, you did a good thing tonight." Ramirez emerged from Gus's place then, leading a sullen Frankie by the arm. The paramedics hovered, checking Ryder's injuries. Spider was already inside the ambulance, hissing at the stinging antiseptic. Knox, arms zip-tied, directed one last glare at the Rock before being guided into the back of a cruiser. The air reverberated with the chatter of bystanders recounting the brawl, each version slightly more dramatic than the last. Gus stepped out, passing broken furniture and scattered glass, relief mingling with anxiety on his face. He caught the Rock's eye, offering a grateful nod. "I'll have to close up for a while, fix all that damage," Gus murmured, "but at least nobody's in pieces." Approaching them, Brooks pulled out a notepad. "I'll need your statements," he said apologetically. "Can you walk me through your perspective one more time?" The Rock obliged, relaying events in a calm, measured tone. His recollection matched Gus's and the patrons, affirming that the bikers had instigated the confrontation. As the statement concluded, Brooks flipped his notepad shut. "Looks like an open and shut case. Might be some paperwork, but we'll handle that. Appreciate your cooperation, Mr. Johnson." With a final nod, he strode toward his patrol car, leaving the Rock standing amidst the wrecked calm of Baywick's main drag. The night's breeze carried a hint of pine from the outskirts of town, a gentle reminder that life, however briefly upended, would keep flowing. Quietly, the Rock turned to see the ambulance pull away, its siren a fading cry, and another cruiser drive off with the rest of Knox's gang. The onlookers began to disperse, their curiosity satisfied. Gus ambled closer. "I can't repay you enough," he said, voice thick with gratitude. "Don't worry about it," the Rock replied. "Just take care of this place. It's worth protecting." The older man smiled through his weariness. Patting the Rock's arm, he went inside to salvage what remained of his bar. For the Rock, the ordeal was over. Tomorrow the town might wake to rumors and exaggerations, but for now, only the echo of sirens and the cool hush of night remained. Under the glow of the streetlights, he walked away, bruised but unbowed, a lone figure reminding a shaken community that strength tempered by compassion was sometimes all it took to keep darkness at bay.